Thank you again for joining our two-day virtual event, Next in Finance, Innovation Through Automation. I say thank you again. If you have joined webinars yesterday, I hope you enjoyed them. If today is your first day attending our two-day event, welcome. And we particularly appreciate your joining us now for our fourth webinar of our event about must-know financial risk management strategies. Now, this webinar and our two-day event are brought to you by BILL, a leading financial operations platform for small and mid-sized businesses, or SMBs. As a champion of SMBs, we are automating the future of finance so businesses can thrive. Our integrated platform helps businesses to more efficiently control their payables, receivables, and spend and expense management. Hundreds of thousands of businesses rely on BILL's proprietary member network of millions to pay or get paid faster. And I would note that BILL, which is headquartered in San Jose, California, is a trusted partner of leading U.S. financial institutions, accounting firms, and accounting software providers. We invite you to visit bill.com for more information after this webinar or after our overall event. I'm Joe Fleischer. I'm thrilled to serve as your moderator. Before I turn the floor over to our speakers, I do want to note that we are pleased to collaborate with Amazon Web Services on this webinar. Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS, is the world leader in cloud technologies that help individuals and organizations build solutions to transform industries, communities, and lives for the better. At this stage, it is my pleasure to turn the floor over to Clark Rogers, Director of Enterprise Strategy with AWS, and my colleague, Krithika Ramadas, Vice President of Risk Strategy with BILL. But before we pose our first polling question, Clark and Krithika, I want to take some time and give you a moment to introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. Clark Rogers. I'm a Director of Enterprise Strategy here at Amazon Web Services. For those of you not familiar with the Enterprise Strategy team, we are former customer executives who led a digital transformation or cloud migration at our previous companies prior to coming to AWS. My former professional background is that of Chief Information Security Officer, and I primarily practice that in the financial services and insurance spaces. I've been with AWS now for about 8.5 years and spend the majority of my time speaking with executive customers, not just CISOs, but the larger C-suite and board of directors about all things security, risk, privacy, and compliance. And really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Clark. Hi, everybody. My name is Krithika, and I've been with BILL for almost 5 years, and I lead the risk strategy team here at BILL. So what I'm responsible for from a risk strategy perspective is to actually keep our customers and the BILL ecosystem safe and secure from any sort of financial fraud. So today I'm excited to talk to you and share some of the tips with you all on how you can do your part to keep the ecosystem safe and secure from any sort of financial fraud. Thank you.
Thank you, Krithika. Thank you, Clark. Now, before we launch into our discussion, I want to pose our first of 4 polling questions. And what we want to find out from you attendees is in what area, so pick one, is your company most in need of risk management strategies from top to bottom? The choices are check payment, business email compromise, we'll occasionally abbreviate that as BEC, insider fraud, that means internal, user authentication and security, information security, data protection, physical protections, compliance protections, or other, and when I say or other, I want to add that if you select other as your choice, you can also feel free to elaborate in the Q&A area of your console. You can feel free to provide more detail. But this is a multiple choice question, and we do ask that you indicate in what area is your company most, and emphasis on most in need of risk management strategies. We want to give you sufficient time to respond. And what we see already, and just want to share this before we launch into our discussion, we see that a plurality plurality indicating data protection being so nearly a third. And then a not too distant second is business email compromise, the phishing that many of you may be familiar with and aim to avoid. And then interestingly enough, and not surprising, but interestingly enough, we've got information security also being a priority, but that's actually fourth. Third is check payment. So think about that. Think about that. So I just want to recap this. Data protection being first, business email compromise being second, check payment being third. We're going to talk about that. With that in mind, what I would now like to do is launch into our discussion. And in particular, what I want to do is talk about these findings. And Krithika, I would welcome your perspective on these particular findings with regard to statistics that show the impact of security breaches on small and mid-sized businesses.
Thank you, Joe. I think it's not surprising that I think most of the top three things in the minds of all of you are like data security and business email compromise and check fraud. And that's what is proven in most of these stats as well, right? Almost $10 billion in losses due to fraud reported by FTC in 2023. And this was highest ever reported in 2023, and we're just waiting for the 2024 numbers to be out, and it's going to be even more, right? Like, and in 2023, I think it was almost $1 billion over from 2022. So, and what are these losses? These losses encompasses all types of fraud, but business email compromise being one of the top, and insider fraud is also another top area that majority of the B2B businesses have been facing. And it has been on the rise since 2020. 81% of the businesses still pay other firms via paper check. So it's not a surprise that check fraud is another important one that's on top of your mind. But the good news is there are a lot of protections that the tools and protections that are available that would help you to deter from check frauds. And here, I think 81% of the businesses still pay all the firms via paper check, and that's the most common B2B payment method, even with all the digitization efforts that are going on. It's reducing, and the small businesses, right? Like these are really small businesses, they are opening up in order to actually like use other digital form of payments, but still check is predominantly the topmost form of payments that the SMBs uses. 76% of the companies were attacked by business email compromise. This is in 2020, and it has been growing year over year, resulting in an average of almost like $100,000 that result as a loss. So, like there has been reports even from FBI, Secret Services, which is talking about like millions of dollars that SMBs are losing because they don't have protection on their email and a track on what's going on within the company. Today, I think Clark and I are excited to talk to you about a lot of simple things that you can do from a security perspective to keep these information protected.
Well, thank you very much, Krithika, for elaborating on these findings. And Clark, I'd love to hear your perspective regarding what does one do with this information, and what are some practical steps one can take, especially to protect small and mid-sized businesses?
So from what we're seeing, at the AWS side, and of course we're covering customers, everything from the one-person shop that's in a garage all the way to the largest enterprise and public sector customer that's out there. A lot of the increases that we're seeing, especially with the business email compromise, is coming from what you've probably been inundated with over the last year to 18 months is generative AI, right? So generative AI is allowing businesses to be more successful and more innovative by leveraging a lot of those tools. But the bad actors are also using those tools where it used to be quite a large jump to be a Russian speaker, for example, to make a convincing English email to convince somebody to click on something. Now it is very easy for them to have convincing dialect correct emails to get in front of people with those phishing links that actually ends to a compromise there. So just wanted to touch on that before we go back to the original slide you had me on.
Absolutely, and I think these findings are absolutely crucial to keep in mind. And indeed, let's continue our conversation. And in particular, I want to hear about your perspective about how one establishes a culture of security. Where does it begin, and what are the principles that underlie creating and reinforcing a culture of security?
Certainly. So just as a frame of reference, I work with customers across every size that you can think of in every industry that you can think of at AWS. And the ones that set themselves apart from a security perspective, and I'll use security broadly to cover compliance, privacy, et cetera, are the ones that focus on bringing security inside the business from a non-technical perspective. And at AWS specifically, and a lot of our leading customers, it all starts at the top, meaning the CEO or whoever your most senior person is has to embrace the idea of strong security, compliance, et cetera. And then you have to have enforcing mechanisms that throughout the organization. One of the examples that I like to share from AWS is weekly, our CEO meets with our CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, for the weekly security meeting. That's 1 hour on his calendar every day or every week. So as you can imagine, when the CEO is dedicating that amount of time, not only is that meeting helpful for him because he learns what's top of mind from the security perspective, and then he can also share to the CISO what's important from him, from his perspective, from the line of business. It sets the tone across the entire organization that security is important. So then when a senior vice president or a vice president who's running a program is reporting into the CEO, he or she has to own security for their particular product line and has to be prepared to discuss it at length. The next important piece is everyone is on the security team. So whether you are a one-person security shop or a 1,000-person security shop, it's typically not enough to secure your environment. So you have to look at every employee in the company as an extension of your security team. In order to do that, you have to make it easy for people to report security incidents, whether it's a business email compromise or something else that just doesn't seem right. We have a term internally that we refer to that if you think you have a security incident, you have a security incident until someone tells you you don't. One of the mechanisms we have there for easy reporting, you can do it via phone, you can do it via text, whatever the case may be. We have web portals to allow people to report security incidents. And the important thing here from a psychological safety perspective, because no one wants to be wrong, right? And nobody wants to call out that someone asked a dumb question or made a dumb statement, is if you submit that ticket, a security professional looks into it. If it turns out to be something, the security team says, thank you. We're going to investigate it and rectify it accordingly. However, if it turns out to be nothing, the security team also says thank you. And the importance there is that it enforces that, hey, you're contributing to the overall good of the organization and helping the overall organization be more secure. Security scaling mechanisms. Again, I have yet to meet a customer, CISO, who says, I have enough security people on my team. So you have to find ways to scale security throughout the organization. So a lot of our customers, are developing software either for external consumption or for internal consumption, but they're still developing software. The best place to put security is as close to the problem as possible. So at the ideation phase of software development is where you want to have those initial security conversations. What is the threat model for this particular piece of software? What are the compliance requirements for this particular function that we're trying to release, right? All those kinds of questions. And then making sure that security is addressed at each stage of the software development lifecycle. So at AWS, and a lot of our customers have similar programs like this, we have a program called Security Guardians, where the core security team trains members of all of the development teams in best practices for security. Those people are embedded in the respective development teams, so they know the business, they know what they're supposed to be coding, but now they have a security lens to everything. So they're making sure that the product is being developed as securely as possible. They have that back channel back to AWS security if they need help or need a Tiger team to do something specific that's maybe beyond their expertise, but that helps the overall security mechanism scale throughout the organization. And then the last piece, depending on how long you've been doing this, I've been doing this quite some time. I remember when most companies did not have a CISO, right? Whether it was an SMB or an enterprise, you had a portion of somebody's day who was responsible for doing security. If something bad happened, they were brought out of the basement to fix it. And then once it was over with, they went back to do whatever they were doing from an IT perspective. Nowadays, our customer CISOs are sitting at the table with the rest of the C-suite. They're reporting to the board. They are really business leaders first and security practitioners second, right? Or that's an additional duty because they really think about the idea of risk and business value over the nuts and bolts of security. Another aspect of this is back in the day in that sort of firefighter mode, lots of people avoided security. And the reason that they did is the lead security official at a particular company was viewed as a cop. Don't do this, don't do that. If you do this, you're going to be in trouble. Or if you do this, you're going to open up the company to all sorts of risk. So what ended up happening is people went around them and put things in place, and which really opened up a company to risk because the security team didn't know what was going on. Fast forward to today, the majority of our successful CISOs or other security leaders are coaches. It's how may I help you be successful? How may I help you understand the risks of what you're trying to do? And then how can I help you? How can we work together to put certain mitigants in place to make sure that we keep the risk as low as possible? Two relatively recent examples of this. If we go back 12, 13 years or so, there was this new thing on the horizon called cloud. And at that time, there were a lot of CISOs, and I knew many of them who said, no way am I going to let my data be put somewhere else that I don't have control over it. It's just not possible. I'm not going to let it happen. So anybody who came to them to say, I want to use cloud, they shut it down. What happened is they did an end run around them. They put their data in the cloud. The CISO found out about it and now had to scramble to figure out how to secure it. We fast forward to the last couple of years or so, we have generative AI. Business leaders are saying, I want to use generative AI. I want to do X, Y, and Z with it. And what do we have CISOs doing today? They're saying, how can I help you? How can we understand the risk of this technology together? What the possible threats are, whether you're going to build something internally or you're going to use a third-party product, whatever the case may be. How are we going to work together to make sure we lower the risk for this, for our organization, and make sure that we do this as securely as and with risk in mind? So it's really exciting to see how culture can really shape your security state at your particular organization.
Clark, I think that you've provided a wonderful overview, including a historical overview, and in particular, the role of the CISO, how the role of the CISO has evolved. as culture of security has emerged. I really appreciate how you're talking about the evolution, for example, from CISOs, from cops to coaches. I think that's a wonderful perspective and especially valuable, Krithika, as we consider a changing security landscape. I'd love to hear your perspective on what one can do, and in particular what executives can do within SMBs to adapt to a changing security landscape.
Thank you, Joe. I think Clark gave a very good view about the security, right? I think during times of economic instability, like one that I think we have been battling through in the last 3 or 4 years, is the fraud attempts will increase. Fraudsters need money, right? They're going to compromise the information. They're going to try hard, and I love the point how Clark was talking about like regenerative AI, like how much the regenerative AI is helping us. It's these technologies are also helping the bad actors today. For the bad actors to get a good, well crafted social engineering email that your employee would think that, yeah, this was sent by Kritika, this was sent by Clark. For them to believe that is much more easier. So in times of economic instability, we have always seen that the fraud attempts would increase. And that's what even the FBI report is saying, as I mentioned before, that the BAC scams have been growing at a rate of 22% year over year in the last 3 years as of 2023. And 2024 numbers will be out, and it has been growing based on the conversations that we've been having. Why? Because the technology that's available for us are also available for the bad actors. So the information, what we call ourselves as an identity, what qualifies as an identity of a person, is bits and pieces of these informations are available in the deep dark web, that I think these bad actors are utilizing those informations and committing the crime. So all the layers of security that we've been talking about is really critical, especially in these times where you're able to differentiate between good versus bad. Account taker of the business accounts are also on the rise, with 21% of the surveyed businesses said that they have been having an account takeover issue, where I think I, as a business customer, come and sign up for a service, and for no mistake of mine, my credentials got compromised, because we all have, like, we live in a world of like so many different apps, and we can't have, like, our human brain can't process like 1 million passwords, right? And not all applications that we all interact with have like sophisticated login methods like fingerprints and all of that. So we deal with an era where we, as like businesses, we have like lots and lots of passwords. So whether we store those passwords or we share the same passwords across the different accounts, those any online accounts are susceptible to an account takeover fraud, where a bad actor actually pretends to be that business, and they take over the account and they perform all illegitimate activities by siphonning fund from whatever payment methods or cards that are available in the profile on that particular account. So 21% of the businesses surveyed, they experienced an increase in ATU, and this has been increasing year over year since 2020. And the Certified Fraud Examiner report also indicates that internal employee fraud, right, it can last almost up to 12 months before you detect it, with a monthly loss of close to 8.3K. That's like 100K. You have to incur 100K loss before you can find that an internal employee is actually committing a fraud by partnering with a criminal, or like, right? So the dual controls and the approvals are really important to have in a business so that you know exactly, right, like that the employees will not be able to, commit these type of fraud. So again, to summarize, I think three major themes that we'll be hearing over and over, which aligns with the survey that we saw from you guys on the first polling question, and also from the various surveys that are coming out, whether it's from FBI or from ACFE. We are seeing that business email compromise is rising year over year, and account takeover, check fraud, and insider fraud are also some of the things that are in the rise. And we'll be talking about like various things that you can do in order to contain these or mitigate these type of fraud events.
And Kritika, I'd love to just add on to this. There's one thing about business email compromise, but again, back to the generative AI discussion, what is possible now, and it's quite easy to do with free software, is to voice clone, right? So what we've seen happen in lots of companies is the CEO calls and says, please transfer fund X to location Y. They know his voice. It's the same mannerisms. It's the same intonations. And it goes through. And then they realize later that the CEO didn't do it. So again, we'll be touching on some controls you can put in place later. But that's a real thing as well. And you don't have to be sophisticated with email to do that. You need a phone number and you need the person's voice. And since so many people are out on social media these days, it's quite easy to get a sample of their voice and their mannerisms and maybe even their video to do it. I haven't heard of a fraudulent Zoom call yet, but I'm sure it's going to happen.
No, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Clark. And we did a live, live event in our office, and we were really surprised that this hacker, the good person, but we just got them, was able to just deep fake our CTO's voice for like 10 seconds. Everybody in the audience thought that, oh, they would have believed that it's
sure.
You're absolutely right. I think it doesn't even need complex technologies. It's just available with very simple mechanisms.
That's a really great point. And when we talk about, just to use business email compromise as an example, even if you don't clone an executive's voice, even the now classic request from an executive to buy like 5,000 gift cards, we've definitely seen that even in some of the test scenarios in various organizations we've been with to verify that we know what to do, which is obviously not to respond to a fake request to buy 5,000 gift cards that did not actually come from an executive. Now, in our first poll, we had seen that data protection, business email compromise, and check payment were among the areas that organizations are trying to address with regard to preventing fraud. That was our first poll. Our second poll is going to ask, because you may recall, check payment was among the top three with regard to our first poll. Our second poll asks, how often does your company pay with or receive payment via paper check? What you're welcome to do is select from the following choices from top to bottom: exclusively, frequently, rarely, never, or unsure. And what we can already see is often, frequently, yes. Frequently, predominating. Now, it's interesting that the top choice is frequently, the second choice is rarely. If we were to pose this question a year from now, I'm sure the percentage of rarely will go up and the percentage of frequently will go down. It's very interesting to see that, because it's not a 50-50 split. What we have here is among respondents a clear majority indicating frequently, with rarely being a distant second. But I think that's going to change. In other words, give it a year or two and frequently will probably not be the majority. But right now it is, and rarely is a relatively distant second. With that in mind, what I would like to do now is continue our discussion. And in particular, I want to refer back to some more statistics. And we were talking earlier about employees and external bad actors, and I'm not talking about somebody who misquotes lines from Shakespeare. Krithika, I'd love to hear your perspective about these findings having to do with rising fraud that is not only internal, but also coming, as you've noted earlier, from external bad actors.
Yeah. So I think when you think about fraud, I think at a very, very broad level, fraud can actually happen because of like lots of data that's available. And if you don't have the right security measures within your organizations, the leak starts from there. That's your internal fraud. Vast majority of the time, fraud happens because of external bad actors who are working in a group, in a criminal ring, but their intent is to siphon the money from any way, shape, or form. They can target a business, they can target a person, they can target, but their main goal is to actually like take out money. So wherever there is money movement, whichever software is actually providing either services or a money movement capability, they are subjected to these attacks from the external bad actors. And these attacks can come in various forms. Either it can come in the form of like they, as an external bad actor, using a stolen identity, come in and they actually register themselves into your account. Or they act like we talked about, they're taking a legitimate owner's account and they're trying to act on behalf of the legitimate owner to perform the legitimate activity. And vast majority of the time, it's because they are social engineering the employees, like Clark was talking about, where I think they're faking the voice of a CEO, or they are acting like a CEO. The example that Joe was talking about, where order 5,000 gift cards that did not come from the C-level exec. So that's where I think the business email compromise come into play, where they are acting on behalf of the vendor, but it's fake, and they get connected to the supplier and say that, hey, I'm the vendor, I'm supplying you, and instead of sending it to my Wells Fargo account, send it to my JP Morgan Chase account, right? So these bad actors are coming in and targeting the employees to claim that I think they are who they say they are, that the vendor who's providing services to them, and they'll actually be redirecting the payment, right? And this all starts with internal insider employee who's actually not paying close attention to the vendor's email. And in many of these cases, these email could just be one letter here and there. I'll tell an example. We saw a company named Divvy, which is DIVVY, and the fraudster created email of that particular company as DIWY, right? It's DIVV, and when you really look at the domain name, you'll not be able to catch a W and a V and a V. It's that close, right? Like they're playing with like some of these tricks as an example that is going to not let your employees clearly look at the email, that it's not from the right vendor. So that's one of the social engineering tactics that the fraudsters will use. And 65% increase has been identified in global losses from business email compromise fraud. We partner a lot with our San Francisco local Secret Service agents who work for Secret Service, and they help a lot to recover millions and millions of dollars to recover money for our small businesses. And they've been saying that the amount of losses has been on the rise for the vendor, primarily because they are relying on an unprotected email ecosystem within the vendors in order to communicate with their customers, and that does not give them enough protection. Most of these times, the customers are saying, "Oh, I've already paid," but it did not come to them, right? So the business email compromise has been on the rise clearly based on all the indications that we are seeing. And 71% of the companies fell victim to fraud via email. Email is the primary source because it's not protected. These emails don't have like sufficient set of controls. You're sharing your bank account information via email. That is very unsecured. That's not protected. It's going in the internet. 71% of the companies, they fell victim because they don't have appropriate security measures in their email setup for the small business. And 48% of the certified fraud examiners who was surveyed in this indicated that employee embezzlement has been on the rise. Bad activities done by internal employees within the SMB. Many times we find these employee embezzlement, the SMB founder or the owner is surprised that, oh my God, is this what is happening? Because you don't have sufficient processes, dual controls in place that makes you believe that, yeah, I'm trusting this employee, and they end up in a large employee embezzlement scenario.
Exactly. And now, these are stats that are not going to make most people happy. However, there is something that we can do. Now, Clark, earlier you're talking about establishing a culture, you're talking about the evolving role of the CISO. Now, once we've established the culture, we are ready to enact particular measures. And I want to hear your perspective on how one can go about enacting measures to mitigate the fraud and reduce those percentages that Krithika shared earlier.
For sure, and thank you for the opportunity to do so. Before I get into these three elements, of course, you would want some email filtering on the front end. You want to be using strong encryption. You want to be using password managers and these sorts of things. If your budget doesn't allow for those types of things, these three areas where I'm going to focus on, assuming you already have them in place, and most companies do, are very low cost, but have a lot of value as far as reducing your risk. So if we start off with identity and access management, what happens quite often in a lot of these business email compromises or other types of fraud is the employee that is falling for it, right? So clicking on the phishing email, whatever the case may be, has too much access to certain systems or file locations or the ability to do that. So what we often recommend is every employee has a quote unquote normal user account that has no access to anything, maybe to their personal files or email, but that's about it. And then if they have to do something special, so if they're an IT administrator, for example, or if they're a financial analyst or financial manager for the company, they have another account that they have to switch into that user, and that account has the ability to perform the certain functions that need to happen. So if you put that kind of thing in place, email comes to the person, they click on the phishing email, their account is compromised, but that account can't do anything, right? So you greatly reduce the risk there. And of course, I'm also assuming there's complex passwords and that sort of thing. The second piece, and probably the most impactful piece on the identity and access management side, is implementing multi-factor authentication for everyone. At AWS, we have hard tokens for everyone to use. Depending on where I go in our internal systems, I get prompted for it all the time. And what that does, it's the old adage of passwords. It's something you have, the token, something your password, and then of course your login, right? So having those three things, the MFA code changes every 30 seconds or so. Just by having that and using that on a regular basis, especially if you're about to cut a check to somebody, whether it's a physical check or going into the system to authorize electronic payment, making sure that that MFA code has to be entered into that system ensures that the person actually doing the work is the person who's supposed to be doing the work and not some outside entity. And we can dive a lot deeper into identity and access management around the whole zero trust methodologies as well. But those are some core aspects of identity and access management that really lowers the risk for organizations, big and small. Second piece is vulnerability management. I can appreciate that in a lot of SMB cases, maybe you're using primarily SaaS software, right? So it's hosted somewhere else, so somebody else has to worry about patching it. But chances are you still have your end user devices at minimum. So your Windows laptops, your Mac laptops, your iPhones, whatever the case may be. So there's two areas here to focus on. One, detection, right? So some sort of detection software that actually is going to be running in the background that cannot be disabled by the average user, that's always running to check for malicious threats, and also that is being updated on a regular basis with the most up-to-date signatures. That's piece one. Step two, and this is the sort of eating your vegetables of security, but it can be very difficult for people to do all the time, is patch your systems. Right? Most modern day operating software has an automatic update feature. So as soon as new security patches come out, they get automatically deployed. Make sure those are enabled. Make sure that all of your users are using the latest version of the software that's patched up to date. Excuse me. If you're developing software for others to consume, it's the same thing. We talked earlier about the culture of security, where security is embedded at the earliest stage of the development cycle. It's the same thing in that case, because you have the ownership of what you're building. You own the security of what you're building, which means you need to know what libraries you're using, which ones are vulnerable, which are not, making sure that you're sending out regular security updates to your customers as well for the products or services that you deliver. And then lastly, threat detection and incident response. So threat detection side, what business are you in? What are the common threats to that business and risks to that business? And make sure you build your security program directed to that. If you're not attacked by a certain type of criminal element, maybe you don't need to architect your systems that way. If your attackers are nation states, you're going to have a much more hardened environment than those if you believe your attackers are just going to be script kiddies or something like that. And then incident response. So even the most sophisticated security organizations, the largest enterprises, the intelligence community, et cetera, they have very strong security protections across their entire environment. They have the MFA, they have zero trust, all these kinds of things. They're patching regularly. They're going to miss something. Something is always not going to be perfect. There's going to be a 0 day that comes out that they haven't quite gotten yet to patch, and that's going to open them up to possible compromise. It's very, very important. Be thinking through and building out a incident response program, incident response playbooks, and making sure that you're involving the appropriate people in your organization in those sort of tabletop exercises or exercises that you go through, because it's very important to have the CEO involved, legal involved, communications or PR involved, as well as the more technical aspects of what would happen in incident response, because you want to practice it when something's not happening and build those playbooks for that. So when something does go bump at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're not panicking for what to do. You're going through your playbook and actually following the bouncing ball that you've already established to get your business back up and running.
Thank you very much, Clark. Now, I see that we have about, literally 15 minutes to go. And so we're going to cover some other aspects fairly quickly. But before we do, first of all, thank you for outlining these practical security measures for SMBs in detail. What we're going to do now is pose our third polling question. And what we want to find out is, what security practices does your company have in place? You can select all that apply. From top to bottom, the choices are employee access key cards, biometric authentication. Many of you might be familiar with fingerprint scans, regular and updated employee security trainings, regular white hat hacks. In other words, where essentially it's kind of a test to see by people internally, white hats as opposed to black hats internally, to see the extent to which your security practices are working. Regular internal security audits, which complement the white hat hacks, 2 or 3 factor authentication, segregation of finance and accounting duties. Now that's not just security. That's also finance, and it pretty much goes without saying within finance, but you have to do it. So in other words, that's an instance where security and finance work together very closely. Data encryption, if there's something else, again, you can select all that apply, but if there's something not listed here, you can include that. Or if you have none, you can select that. Want to give attendees sufficient time to respond. Also acknowledging we do have brief period of time to continue our discussion. So just want to point out, just to summarize, that a plurality of respondents have indicated that security practices they have in place, 2 or 3 factor authentication, that is in the lead, a little more than a fifth of respondents. And then not too distant second, we've got regular and updated employee security training and employee access key cards. So just wanted to note that. We're now going to do is continue our discussion. I'm going to turn the floor back to you, Krithika, and we're briefly going to talk about how one can prevent some of these scenarios that we've described, starting with business email compromise.
Thank you, Joe. Some of the best practices that you can do is definitely educating your employees on the business email scams, what they need to actually be careful about, right? Like always, it's good for you to actually check whether the vendors that you're working with, you talk to them in a medium that, like, for example, if there is a sensitive change on their bank account, operating bank account, which does not normally happen, it's always a good practice to check with them in a phone number that you know that you've been interacting with the business, and check with them if hey, they have asked for a change, or they've asked for a prepayment on a particular service that they have not yet provided. Communicate always through secure channel. Do not just trust email. Educate your employees to also use other mediums such as phone, or a number that you know outside that you can talk to, or a different person that you can talk to within the company. Allow vendors to manage their own banking information. What this is when that's what I think a software like BILL does, is when a payer is actually paying a vendor, we allow the vendor to actually key in their bank information. Do not send sensitive information in an open email, right? So allow, like, enter into like a portal where it's covered with an multi-factor authentication protection, and key in your information. Joe, do you want me to go to the next slide? Okay. Now, on the similar lines, I think we are going to talk about like all the different types of fraud, and how you can help in mitigating those type of fraud, the top ones that we saw. How can we prevent an insider fraud? Enforce separation of duties. We talked about, like, I think even in the polling question, I think I saw maybe third or fourth choice where we were talking about, like, hey, there is a clear separation of duty between financial responsibility and other responsibility. How many people have access to your operating account? And what are the thresholds that you have? Right? Like, you can be a 10 employee company. How many employees, like an employee, have access to maximum pay up to $5,000? And if they pay anything above $5,000, it requires an approval from a different person, right? Enforce separation of duties. Set up dual controls where you have at least 2 admin approvals for any major changes, right? Let's say you're paying to you have you're interacting with a vendor, and that's where the maximum majority of the payments go, and it always have been going for the last 4 years to a Bank of America account. Now all of a sudden that got changed to a different bank, right? So major changes on your systems will have to go through a dual control. especially 2 of your admins will have to review and approve, right? That puts like some controls and policies, even if your internal employees are committing fraud. And always have detailed audit trails, right? Like that's one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, right? Like you can use softwares like Bill that helps you to keep track of those audit trails, but you can also keep them through any software that you're using, but keeping detailed audit trails, timestamps, and approvals will also put that discipline within your employees so that it'll be hard for them to commit an insider fraud when so many different eyes are going to be on it. They'll not commit the fraud, right? Like that's these are some of the methods that you can use for preventing insider fraud. Now the important thing is, as Clark talked about, protecting unauthorized access. This is going to help you to protect your account takeovers, right? Enable permission-based access wherever possible, especially if you're an SMB and you're dealing with a lot of sensitive things. How can you give permissions for different set of employees? Hey, you're an admin, you're a bookkeeper, you can handle my finances, you have the authority to handle my operating account to a certain dollar threshold. But in sensitive actions, always enforce multi-factor authentication. So if your software capability that you have in the back office operations does not allow it, it's worth enough for you to actually look at like some basic software that can actually help you to do these two-factor authentications, right? If you're using Bill, or if you're a Bill customer, every time that you come in and you perform sensitive actions, your employees will be asked to do a multi-factor authentication. Enforce a strong password policy, right? Keep changing that, right? Like ask them to change it once in a while, right? Only the end login data over a secure channel. Share these, like always make sure that it's a secure channel through which the data is being transmitted through, right? Within your do not send like plain text passwords via email. Do not encourage your employees to share email passwords, right? Like over plain text through email. And automatically log out the employees and customers after a period of inactivity. Especially if one of your employee who has all sensitive access just leaves his desk for 10 minutes and he's not logged out, another employee who's actually want to commit the bad activity can come in and actually steal the information. Take care of putting in some best practices where you log out the employees after a certain period of inactivity. Review your security policies for all your vendors, your software providers that have access to your data, right? And use a security software always to monitor what's going on, anything that's being anything that's intrusive, and any prevention appliances or network monitoring technology so that you can detect any sort of unauthorized accesses, right? If all of these technologies, these are pretty basic stuff that you have to do, but if it is really hard, then at least use a software that will help you to actually do your back office automation while providing these basic, simple capabilities that's more affordable from your standpoint.
Well, thank you very much, Krithika. I know we have a few minutes just to cover this, and I just want to acknowledge that sometimes security is not in a vacuum. It's never in a vacuum, and there are some implications of establishing solid security policies. So, Krithika and Clark, I want to give you just a few moments to cover key takeaways. We'll then pose our last poll, and then we will plan to conclude, and we'll plan to address topical questions from attendees actually after our webinar. But first, Krithika and Clark, key takeaways.
Yeah, I think key takeaways from my perspective is always know what your threats are, right? And work on preventing the fraud. Educate your customers, educate your employees so that you know what you're dealing with and they know what you're dealing with. and use any tools and technologies that are going to help you to prevent fraud?
Well said. And the only thing I'll add briefly is strong security is a mix of both the culture side of things and the technology side of things. You can implement all the top security software on the planet, but if you don't have that culture to really think through why you're using it and the end result around lowering risk, then you're not going to be as effective as those companies that combine culture and technology together.
Those are great points. And when you talk about how culture informs behavior, and also, again, we talked about security does not exist in a vacuum, and it has positive effects. If one has a solid security policy, it has positive effects, not only in terms of preventing fraud, but also improving vendor relationships and promoting long-term cost savings, as well as supporting the health of the business. Now, before we conclude, we do want to make sure we pose our last polling question. And our last polling question is going to ask attendees to indicate if you'd like to be contacted. So just feel free to select a choice that corresponds to your answer. In the meantime, thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day.